Hey, welcome back, Faithful Politics family. If you're watching us on our YouTube channel, we're glad to have you. I am your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by your faithful host, Pastor Josh Bertram. How's it going, Josh?
Hello. Doing well. How are you?
Excellent. And this week we have U.S. Representative A. Donald McEachin. He is Virginia's fighting 4th Congressional District. This year he's up for re-election, and we are so happy to have him on the show to talk about all the things. So thank you very much, Congressman, for being here.
Yes, thank you, Congressman.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so just to get down to sort of the nitty gritty, you are the Congressman for the 4th District. So inquiring minds want to know, what are your top 3 places to eat in the 4th District?
Well, I am not much of a restaurant person. Now, if you ask my wife, Colette, she would roll out the list for you. But, I'm just an Old Charlie's, Applebee's type of guy. If you make me say a third one, I'd probably say Lily Pearl, which is an African-American owned restaurant in the district.
Okay. All right. Good. Well, so what exactly got you into politics? Because
that's an interesting question. I was actually born in Nuremberg. Now, Richmond's always been our ancestral home. So when my dad retired, ultimately we came back to Richmond. But I was born in Nuremberg, and as an Army brat, you get tired of moving around. So eventually you ask your parents, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? And they explain to you about NATO, and they explain to you about all sorts of things, including Congress. And all of a sudden you start thinking, if Congress is big and bad enough to make my dad move around, how do I become one of those guys?
Exactly.
And of course, in the 60s, they said you have to be a lawyer. And so I'm like a lawyer, like Perry Mason, not the Perry Mason that the young people know, but the Perry Mason that had Bella and he, never lost a case.
The black and white Perry Mason.
There we go. And so I said, I can do that. And so I became a lawyer, and ultimately I went into politics.
That's super
I'd
cool.
I'd like to think my thought process matured over the years, but I really do think that was the seed of it.
That's and now you're this is your second term, third term.
Third term, running for my 4th.
Got it. Awesome. And how are you feeling about your chances of winning?
We feel real good. We have a really good district. We've got a good message, so we feel very positive.
Oh, that's good. So, I do have to ask you one question about Biden, President Biden. He gave a speech in Philadelphia recently regarding sort of the state of the country, and he utilized like a term like MAGA Republicans, and I looked up recently. 538 is like this organization that just does a lot of stats and whatnot. So on their website, they have this like Congress Trump score, which is basically it's a breakdown of how often like a Congress member voted for Trump back type of initiatives. And I looked up your name, and it said that you voted with a Trump initiative like 14.9% of the time. So my question is, like, are you part of the MAGA Republicans President Biden was referring to?
No. I supported President Biden from the very beginning. In fact, I was the first elected in Virginia to endorse him, and I endorsed him maybe a month or 2 after he declared. So I am far from that. I would suggest to you those are weak moments on the part of the former president where he actually had a cogent thought that I could agree with.
That's funny. I don't care who you are. So if elected, Congressman, because we all look and we see, what are the priorities? We try to figure out how to vote. If elected, what would you say your priorities are for the 4th largest district in Virginia?
Well, it's the 4th Congressional District, but my
4th Congressional.
My priorities are going to pretty much remain the same as they've been since we've been there. The environment is, to me, the most important issue of the 21st century. We've got exactly a finite amount of time to get it right so that we pass on a clean earth to our children and our children's children. I was a Boy Scout, so I've been trained to leave the campground at least as good as I found it, if not better. And I want to make sure that we do that as a people. very pleased with what we've done so far in terms of the climate initiatives, but we have more work to do. I am, along with the chair of the Natural Resources Committee, Raul Grijalva, have put forward a bill called EJ for All, Environmental Justice for All, which is meant to empower poor communities, which sometimes they're poor white, sometimes they're poor brown, sometimes they're poor black, sometimes they're indigenous or tribal, and to make sure that they're empowered to employ their own solutions to the environmental problems. As you can imagine, where you have cheap labor, cheap land, you get all the environmental issues landing on top of them because you can just build stuff, you can site stuff, you can do all sorts of things. So that's a high priority for us. Of course, we need to be aware that we need to make sure that we're working on lowering the price of everything, including what the Fed's doing, which I'll tell you I'm not too appreciative of, because I think it's making things more challenging, not less. But, we've set up the Fed to be an independent agency, so I can't really influence that. But we do want to make sure that gas prices continue to go down and that we get a grip on everyday ordinary inflation, what's happening at the grocery store and elsewhere. And we cannot forget gun violence. We made great progress with the bipartisan gun bill, but, we're still having murders and shootings here in the city of Richmond. I don't know how in-depth research that you all did, but my wife is the Commonwealth Attorney here in the city of Richmond, which for those of you who don't live in Virginia, you would call that a DA, a district attorney. And so she comes home very sad sometimes with having to deal with the gun violence here in the city, and as we try to figure out ways to combat it. And Pastor Josh, you'll certainly appreciate this, and so will you, Will. But a lot of this has to do with home training. We need to just have good family structures in place. Yeah. To begin to make sure that our children understand there are other ways of solving problems than whipping out a gun or whipping out a knife or hurting somebody. Yeah. So those are some of the initiatives and priorities that we'll have.
Yeah, I want to kind of go back to the environment for a second, because it's the environment is a issue that I'm really, really interested in. It's one we've had a few Christian environmentalists, professors that teach us stuff, and it's a problem that's going to affect everybody, not just me and my house or me and my political party. It's going to affect everybody. And I know that you sit on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce. You also sit on Climate Crisis, House Committee on Natural Resources. And I'm curious to kind of get your thoughts on, where are we at currently, with our state of the environment, pollution, all that other kind of stuff, and how do we fix it? And specifically, how do we fix it without bankrupting the country?
Well, that's the wonderful thing about it. But let me start at the beginning. We unfortunately, when I came into office in 2016, we ended up wasting 4 valuable years in terms of the environment. But one of the interesting things you said is, or you alluded to, is that you had some Christian environmentalists on. And one of the interesting things about the environmental movement is where the Christian left and the Christian right can actually come together and work together for something, for a common goal, and that excites me. I don't consider myself a pastor, but I do have my MDiv, and so that process excites me when I can see things like that. Businesses, awesome. During those 4 years, actually reached out and started doing things in a positive mode, understanding where the world needs to go. And so while government didn't do what it needed to do, we did make some progress. Of course, with the change in administration and change in the power structure in the Congress, we were able to do some things in terms of the climate crisis most recently. But it is an initial step. Everyone agrees, of course, I'm biased, right? Because I was just talking about EJ for all.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone agrees, at least, that you cannot fix the crisis without addressing environmental justice.
Yeah.
Because until we are in a position to essentially uplift the poor, to bring good news to the least of these, if you will, then we really haven't solved the problem. In fact, we're allowing the problem to exacerbate. And so we need to get our arms around that. That's one of the reasons to bring it into sort of a today focus that I will absolutely positively oppose the Manchin side deal. It essentially eviscerates anything we could ever do on EJ for all. It throws out NEPA, which is a requirement the government actually have a conversation with people before they do something. So it eviscerates NEPA and gives what I think is the most important tool that we can give folks, which is I'm trying to make sure I call it right. Impact. To make sure that as we cite things in different areas, that we don't just look at the impact of that one particular silo, but that we look at the cumulative impact of what's going on in that area to make sure that that area can actually take the weight, if you will, of the new structure. And so the Manchin deal, I think, eviscerates all that. Plus, it puts into play the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which, in my view, is just taboo coming through Virginia in the fashion that it does.
That's so interesting. Thanks so much for sharing that. Thinking about the environment, it's going to cost, for us to be able to fix or at least mitigate what's going on. And of course, we have to count the cost of what we're doing and what our actions are. But thinking about the cost, you had mentioned all of the costs of inflation and things like that. And I guess I had a question about the Inflation Reduction Act. How do you foresee it helping folks in the 4th District?
Sure. And I'm going to answer that question in just a second, but I did leave out one piece of the environmental piece, is that the cost is mitigated by the fact that we're going to create millions of jobs. Good paying jobs, as we learn to build solar panels more efficiently, windmills, as we actually begin to imagine, and no one innovates better than Americans, new things that we haven't thought of to fix some of our problems, whether it's carbon capture, new nuclear, or whatever. But we can talk about that more if you like. But to answer your question about the act, the Inflation Reduction Act, we've capped the price of medicine, particularly insulin, for our seniors. We've while it will take some time for prices to go down, we've slowed that down dramatically by enacting the law. And so those two things alone, I think, will be a great boon to the 4th Congressional District.
It's interesting. I recently just spoke with Maya McGinnis. So she's the president of the Bipartisan Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. We talked about the Inflation Reduction Act, and she actually had a lot of really good things to say. She said it's like one of the first deficit reducing bills in a long, long time. But then she caveated with, but like there's a lot of other spending that's kind of taking place that's almost dissolving some of those gains. So I'm curious if there is a way for us to approach our deficit, and we can keep it sort of within the context of the environment, what we do to spend to help the environment. If there's something we can do to reduce our deficit and still thrive as a country.
Well, the first good move of any interviewee is to reject the the underlying assumption of the question, which is that working on the environment is going to create a deficit. It is not.
Right.
We reject that notion out of hand because we've seen the numbers. And we know that with the jobs that we're going to create, it's going to end up being a plus, not a negative. But, you know, we do have things outside of the environment that we're spending money on. I mean, you know, do we want to help the folks in the Ukraine or not? We made a policy decision to do that. I support that decision. But that's costing us a boatload of money. That's causing a lot of the inflation that we're dealing with. It was the cause of rising gas prices until the president started taking certain actions, including releasing the National Reserve. So, you know, we have made certain policy decisions as a country that is contributing to this notion of a deficit. But remember this about a deficit. I learned this in Econ 101. A deficit brings future benefits into the present. And so there's an upside to it now. There's no doubt that we've got to pay for it. But, you know, if we are prepared to have the political will to do things like what we've already done, which is to have those folks who make over $400,000 a year pay their fair share, if we have the ability to reverse the Trump tax cuts, which gave $2 trillion to the wealthiest of Americans, I think we would have gone a long way in terms of being able to handle the deficit problem.
You know, the deficit is always an interesting concept, an interesting discussion, because, you know, you have that billboard in New York that says, this is how much you owe, you know, as an individual. And you look at it, you're like, those are just numbers, you know, that can't be real, but it is real. And, you know, one of the ways that we get, of course, bring that deficit down is through taxation. Probably the main way, right? We get through taxation so that we can actually have the money to spend that down. But we get taxation through people, but also right through businesses. And the new businesses are super important. And I know that there's been some new businesses, you know, coming to Virginia, like, for instance, the Lego warehouse.
Right to the 4th Congressional District.
There you go. Exactly. And so how much credit do you feel like, you know, Governor Youngkin has in this versus, say, the rest of, you know, the political infrastructure of Virginia in general?
This is going to sound partisan, at least initially, but I hope by the time I'm finished, you'll understand my reasoning.
Yes, please.
I certainly think Governor Youngkin deserves some credit for finishing the deal. A deal like that really starts off with the previous administration. And so that's really a Northam accomplishment. Now, that's not to say that I don't believe Governor Youngkin will bring businesses into Virginia, and quite frankly, the next governor will take credit for some of those, right? Because they will kind of overlap like the Legos does. But I think Legos is an initiative and ought to be credited to Governor Northam. And again, Governor Youngkin will bring in some businesses and do us some good, because Virginia, despite what he said during the campaign, is a good place to do business. Has always been a great place to do business. Has always been a great place to raise a family. The question has always only been, are we the number one or number two state? And we are number one. We've achieved that under Northam, and we're maintaining that under Youngkin, and that helps bring these businesses and these opportunities to our citizenry.
You know, on that issue of, you know, it sounding partisan, which I don't think, I mean, I think that's just sort of the game. Partisan, I mean, you know, Trump was sort of, you know, taking credit for a lot of the stuff that Obama did that set him up. So I don't think it may be partisan, but it's not surprising. But I do want to talk about a little bit about political division in the country, and then maybe, you know, kind of focus just in the Congress, because, you know, we created this podcast. It was a pandemic project. And Josh and I come from completely different sides of the political spectrum, but like he's my pastor, right? So like, and I think he's a good guy. I may think he's wrong on a lot of things, but that doesn't necessarily interfere with us just having a friendship. And I'd venture to guess there are more bipartisan friendships within Congress than we're probably led to believe. So I'm wondering if you can maybe, give us a little, behind the scenes or, how the sausage is made, description of what you see within Congress. I mean, we turn on the news and we're like, oh yeah, all of them hate each other, but speaking to some other folk, we even had like some of the Capitol Police officers on our show. And they're like, yeah, that's not really how it is, when the cameras are turned off. So can you give us some insight about how divided are we really in Congress?
Oh, there's some deep divisions. Don't get me wrong, but I'm glad you asked the question because quiet as it's kept, Morgan Griffith of Virginia's 9th Congressional District is one of my closest friends. We formed a bond and a friendship when we served together in the General Assembly, and then he left and went to Congress, and I eventually caught up with him, and I consider him a dear friend. And that doesn't mean we agree on anything, right? But I mean, other than we want Virginia to be successful. But we have had occasion to work together on some things, and quite frankly, he understands my politics, I understand his politics, and there's some things I don't even ask him to do because I know he can't. And there's some things that we're able to work together on. And so there are more friendships like mine and Morgan's than you would know. One of the ways you can tell about how well we get along is to look at our suspension calendar. No one ever wants to look at the suspension calendar. But the suspension calendar means that we're going to pass things without regards to the rules because we all agree. We passed something 400 to 20 or something like that, right? So, but that's not what sells papers. That's not what makes you turn on Fox News or CNN. It's the controversies that make you do that. And the controversies are important, but I would suggest to you that they are not as divisive as some of our newscasters would have you believe. Now, make no mistake about it, January 6th has left a sore taste in every Democrat's mouth, and a few Republicans on top of that. And there are people, quite frankly, that I won't stand on a bill with because of the January 6th insurrection. But you take a guy like Morgan, who certainly wasn't part of the insurrection, but voted in what I would consider to be the wrong way, and our friendship still overrides what I see as a bad policy blunder on his part. And he can probably point to a lot of things he thinks are bad policy blunders on my part. But January 6th has left us divided. But you know what? I'm going to give you another answer to this whole division question that none of your folks who are listening want to hear. We represent the people who send us to D.C. If they weren't so divided, if they weren't at each other's throats the way they are, we wouldn't feel like we have to imitate them. Now I have, an overwhelmingly Democratic district, so I don't have to be nasty, for lack of a better word, right, to get attention. But when you're in one of those close districts and, people aren't getting along with each other, you end up picking a side. And so if folks really want more unity in the Congress, we need to be unified in our churches. We need to be unified in our neighborhoods. We need to be unified in our schools.
Wow. Yeah. Since you brought up January 6th, were you there on that day?
Yes, but I wasn't on the floor. I was in my office.
Oh, thank goodness. Yeah. Can you kind of describe the feeling, the noises? Did you see anything?
I saw most of what you saw on TV. Now, of course, what happened was that the Capitol Police came through and got us out of our offices, so that we were essentially playing magic revolving offices, so that no one would actually know where we were. And so, of course, I texted my wife and my children and said I'm fine and all that. But what I felt mostly was anger, because I knew I had faith that we were going to get done what we were supposed to get done that day, and all they were doing was holding things up. Now, I had no idea, quite frankly, the level of violence that was going on. I mean, you could see it on TV, right? But you didn't see police officers being, stabbed or, coming in within an inch of their lives. You didn't see that, at least on the television broadcast that I saw. So I felt a lot of anger that day.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think I felt the same way, kind of shock and anger, like, in what's going on, is this isn't the country I grew up in, and that kind of sense. And it makes me think about, as a pastor, there are a lot of Christians there, professing Christians there that day. I have a lot of people that profess faith in Christ, friends, that think it was a good thing, or know of them. I personally don't. I was very shocked by it. But I guess one of the things that we've tried to look at the show quite a bit is Christian nationalism, and there's a wide variety of religious views among kind of far right and ultra right groups. We've talked to other people about that, but where do you see Christian nationalism in terms of its threat to America? Is it a threat? What kind of threat is it? How do you propose we handle this problem? What do you think?
Well, I'm a disciple of Christ. And so I reject the notion of Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
It is nothing but a euphemism for a white power movement. It may not be the Klan, but it is something very much akin to that. I think we handle it by making sure that we're enforcing the laws. We've got the laws on the books to handle most of what they do as far as as violent or anti-American, and we just need to enforce it. I wish we could get away from that term, though, Christian nationalism, because it's making the rest of us look bad.
Yeah, I hear you on that.
That'll preach.
It is question whether it's nationalistic or not, but it doggone sure isn't Christian.
Yes.
And so that's not the Christ I've followed all my life, or tried to follow all my life. And so
sure.
I have a problem with that term.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So I don't think you have any scheduled debates with your opponent.
Nope, we're not doing that.
Oh, you're not doing it?
No, we don't. I made a statement early on that we were not going to debate somebody who just makes stuff up. He won't concede that I'm the legitimately elected congressman. He won't concede that Biden's legitimately elected. He's all worked up because he had a lead until midnight. What he doesn't seem to want to understand is that after midnight, let me start preaching. After midnight, they started opening up the absentee ballots. If you remember the 2020 election, you don't remember it from my perspective.
Got it.
Biden America was making every Democrat cast votes early, right? We were going to get all our votes in the bucket by a certain time. And so the only people left on election day, at least in my district voting, really were Republicans. That's a bit of an exaggeration. But the way Virginia counted votes back then was that they counted day of first, and then they opened up everything else. And that's when, around midnight, that's when I started taking the lead and ended up winning by 20 points or something like that. But, he won't concede that. So you just don't go into a debate with a guy who just makes stuff up. If we can't agree on a certain set of facts, then we can't really have a debate, and I'm not going to worry myself about it.
Got it. Yeah. And I'm curious. This is probably another inside baseball question, but I know that you've sponsored roughly like 68 bills. Few have been passed in the House. one was signed into law, which is the Hopewell Post Office designation. However, you've co-sponsored over like 900 some odd bills, and about 40 have become law. And, for the lay person, that doesn't really know about how, I don't know, how the sort of wheeling and dealing goes on and behind the scenes, like what's the biggest challenge in getting a bill actually to the floor for a vote, in your opinion?
Well, this isn't the Virginia legislature anymore. This is the United States Congress, and it is built to be slow. It is built because you've got 50 states, you've got all sorts of competing interests, and it's designed to be deliberative. The other thing that folks don't really take a look at, which is the way most of us get things passed, and I couldn't tell you, I don't have the stats, right? But is the amendment process. You have an idea, maybe at one time it was a freestanding bill, but it's more efficient to take the elements of that freestanding bill and attach it to something else that ultimately passes. I've certainly been fortunate enough to do that in cases dealing with our cable system, our internet system, in terms of helping with what we call the MAPS issue. Now we're getting down into the weeds, folks, but MAPS is an issue where you can't figure out where to put your money in terms of infrastructure when it comes to internet if you don't know who's being serviced appropriately. And so if you don't have good maps, literally maps to show that, you can't get the job done. And so I was able to get a bill amended to make sure that our maps are accurate and there's certain penalties for failure to do that. That's just one example that you don't necessarily look at because it was no longer a freestanding bill. It's part of somebody else's bill. But the amendment, that piece of it right there, was an idea of mine in my office.
That's really cool. I love that. Thinking of legislation, there's a big call right now for legislation that will make it so Congress members can't trade stocks, like they're prevented from trading stocks. What do you think about that? Do you think that's fair? Is it aligned with American values of freedom and all of that to put a preventative measure?
While I respect the patron, I don't like the bill. I think that there are enough penalties in place beyond just insider trading penalties for congresspersons if we do something with a nefarious intent when it comes to trading stocks or bonds or what have you. I do think, if we need to put more laws in place, that's fine. But an outright ban, I think, is inappropriate. But we'll see what they come down with in terms of the ultimate bill. I mean, I can imagine there would be shades of gray that I could support, but an outright no, you can never trade. Your wife can never trade. And oh, by the way, if you have adult children in the house, they can't trade either. I don't know if that's something I can support.
Yeah, that
makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I'm curious because I know nothing about the stocks. So if I were to be in Congress and that was something I wanted to do, I would do it poorly because I just don't even know how the whole system works, So and I'd probably get myself in all kinds of trouble and wonder what the heck, why are you taking me to jail? But the perception from the voter, is I think of the COVID stuff, I can't remember. I think it was Kelly Loeffler, was making some trades for, I don't know, it could be 3M, don't quote me on that, but it was just for organizations and companies that were making stuff in preparation for this big COVID effort, So are there laws that prevent, an actual sitting Congress member from doing that? And if there's not, what would be sort of the shades of gray that you would be okay with? If you were amending, a bill, I know that Senate just, they the Republicans filibustered the Disclose Act, actually shortly before we started recording. But I'm curious if you have any thoughts on like, like how is that fair, and if not, how do we change that?
Well, I'd have to, when it comes to the shades of gray, as it were, I'd have to actually see them and look at them and think about them. But certainly we don't want congresspersons getting inside information in any form and being able to trade on that basis. So that should be, how we go about banning that, I'm absolutely in favor of. We can have a conversation about how exactly to do that. I think we've got pretty good laws in place to prevent that. But if we don't, then, we can certainly work on that. I sit on some pretty cool committees, and I don't know that I've seen a whole lot of opportunity to engage in that sort of insider trading. I don't know that I've learned anything before it hits the newspapers or while it's hitting the newspapers, and basically getting into the public realm. So, again, I appreciate where the sponsor's coming from, but I think she's overdoing it a bit.
Got it. So Congressman, this will probably be my most difficult question to ask you. So,
I don't know. The restaurant question was pretty nasty. So,
so the largest VA hospital in Virginia falls in your district.
Yes, it does.
Hunter Holmes McGuire.
I got an answer.
Okay. It's the hospital that I receive all of my care. So I'm a veteran, former infantry guy, served time in Iraq. Got all dinged up, banged up, mentally, physically, what have you. I'm currently undergoing a issue, with the VA, like for one reason or another, like my entire side hip is numb and I've been trying to get care, and the fastest I can get it is October 14th for an MRI. And I'm sure that my story isn't so unique, because, this isn't the first time it's happened to me. Talking to others, they've had mixed opinions about their care. So I'm curious on what you can do or what you plan on doing to kind of just help improve the services to take care of our vets at McGuire.
Well, I don't know that we've taken an approach specifically to McGuire, but we have taken an approach to trying to improve care for vets across the Commonwealth. As you know, Virginia is one big military base, from the Pentagon to our naval assets in Tidewater to Fort Lee, soon to be Fort Gregg in Central Virginia. So we understand that we need to take care of our veterans. We have, on a case-by-case basis, because we get those complaints, right? The same sort of complaints that you have contacted McGuire Hospital and done what we can to accelerate the care and that sort of thing. Part of the problem with Hunter McGuire is funding. They need more money. They need more money for simple things like parking checks, and other things, so they can bring in more staff and more physicians. So we've taken that approach, but I don't know that we have a one-size-fits-all solution for the delays that veterans have to go through. And I think most offices, it's not just mine, but most offices take that on a case-by-case basis and try to fix it. And by the way, we certainly are thankful for your service. And if I'm your congressman, call me. We'll try to get you in before October 14th.
Yeah, maybe I'll play this podcast to my provider. I mean, like, mind you, like the doctors, the nurses, I think are doing the best they can. So I don't want to like denigrate, their service and everything that they're doing. I mean, I have a really, really fantastic doctor there, and yeah. So but you did say one thing which caught my attention. So Fort Lee Fort Lee is changing its name to what? What again?
Let's back up. I hope it's changed to Fort Gregg, and the naming commission came out with the hyphenated name Fort Gregg, who was an African American 3-star general. He was the highest ranking African American at the time of his retirement, and a nurse, a lieutenant colonel, female nurse, African American, who did some, as I understand it, some great work in Europe during World War II, and I can't remember her name to save my life right now. But as you know, the naming commission has now turned in its recommendations, and Fort Gregg hyphen this wonderful nurse is one of the is the name for Fort Lee. So we're hopeful that will happen. Now, in full disclosure, I grew up with General Gregg. He was my dad's best friend. They went into the Army together. If you can imagine, they went in literally as privates. My dad retired as a warrant officer. General Gregg retired as a 3-star. But to think that you went all that way, right, from private to 3-star is an amazing feat to me.
Unbelievable.
And look, he is exceedingly well qualified. They have a hall at Fort Lee named after him because, as you know, Fort Lee right now is the quartermaster logistical joint base for the United States military. They've got a medal named after him. And so my thought was, well, let's just go ahead and name the fort after him and call it a day. And he's 95 years old, so I'm hoping that we get this done real soon. He's in great health. I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago, but at 95, we don't want to take any chances. Let's get this done.
Yeah. Well, if for whatever reason that doesn't come to pass, I've got a free idea for you, Congressman. Here's my idea. We name it, we keep it as Fort Lee, but it's Fort Stanley from Marvel. I mean, he was an 82nd Airborne.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and you wouldn't have to spend a dime on relabeling everything.
Yeah,
so just keep that in the back of your head.
That's interesting. Well, when you were talking about McGuire, I thought you were going to tell me to get that name changed, and we're working on that.
Oh, really? No. Yeah, that's the least of my problems with that hospital.
I understand that from what you told me.
That's awesome. It's the healthcare issues are always such hot button topics, right, for all of us, and it has been from as long as I've been paying attention to politics, and Governor, of course, one huge healthcare issue that's been put under healthcare. Some people think it's different, but of course, it is a healthcare concern, and it is the issue of abortion. Right, things have to take place in medical facilities and all that, and I don't need to go into the divisive nature of that. All of our listeners will essentially know the divisive nature of it. We see that Governor Youngkin, he stated he wants to pursue a 15-week ban on abortions. And I'm curious to know what you think about that. But even more, what do you think about this whole abortion issue in Virginia, and how do you feel like Virginia should move forward handling this now that it's been passed down to the states?
Well, I think Virginia has it exactly right in terms of letting the decision be done between the woman, the physician, and if the woman chooses to consult with a faith counselor, a person of faith. That is not Governor Youngkin's proposal is not unlike what Lindsey Graham proposed, I guess, maybe a week or two ago. And so, that's part of what's going to be on the ballot in a very real sense in November is, do you want to continue on with a regime where, on a national level, where you can have choice, or do you want that choice taken from you? You will see us as Democrats put that in terms of freedom. You're going to have the freedom to choose how your health care is delivered to you and by whom and what happens. Are you going to have the freedom to have your vote actually counted? Are you going to have the freedom to walk down the street and not have to worry about crime and violence? All those things, you'll hear us talk about in those sorts of terms. But Virginia doesn't need to change. Virginia, I think, has it right. I know that it is a issue of that hits home and hits people in a very sensitive place. But allowing a person to have that choice, I think, is the right answer. Not to challenge you, Pastor, because I don't know where you come from on this, but that's actually been, even from my perspective, enhanced by my journey through seminary, because some things only you and God can work out. And so I think that's one of those issues.
Yeah, I definitely respect that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Congressman, we'll wrap up here in a minute, but before I do, I do want to hear a little bit about what's on your agenda when you win in November. So obviously, I'm team McEachin.
Yay.
and John,
I'm Team McEachin too, but I'm not in your district.
Yeah,
I guess Josh I'll be Team the Republican here.
Yeah, Josh
is
in the 7.
Your district, I'd vote for you.
So Josh is in the 7. So he's got Spanberger and Vega.
Vega,
yeah. And we've been trying to get them both on. So if you happen to run it at Congresswoman Abigail,
if you could put in a good word for us, we'd love to interview.
But you don't bite.
Yeah. So when you win in November, what does the next 2 years look like for you, and what can people in the 4th, kind of be expecting?
One of the things I tell my staff is that we don't have a reason to exist unless we are making government work for people. And whether that's making sure that the post office, and let me tell you, the post office has been the bane of my existence.
The Hopewell one?
Not just Hopewell. I mean, in fact, Hopewell has not been a problem. It's been Emporia, it's been Richmond, it's been any number of them. But it's been the bane of my existence for a good while. Whether it's making sure that you're getting your Social Security check, whether it's making sure that you're getting fair treatment from the IRS, we have to make government work for you. So that's always going to be our number one priority. When it comes down to an issue set, we'll be back working on the environment. Heretofore, we've been working on, which you might think of more about things in the air. How do we control our carbon emissions? I think you'll see my office shift a little bit more to water. It defies my imagination how we can be one nation and have too much water in one part of the country and not enough in the other, and we can't figure out how to get from one place to another. And I know that takes some engineering. I know that's going to take some thought, but we're going to put some brain sweat into it and see what the Congress has done to date and try to figure out how we can augment those efforts. But water is already a critical issue in Virginia's 4th Congressional District, because if you think about it, we're 400 years old. We might not be 400 years old as a state, but we're 400 years old, and we've been using water that long. And I'm here to tell you that we've got water pipes that are wooden. We've got water pipes that are lead filled. We've got water pipes that have got asbestos in it. We've got water pipes that we don't know where they are because the records were in the courthouse, and the courthouse burned down in 1901. And unless there's a leak, we don't know where it to try to fix it. And so, and those are no exaggerations. I can point to examples of those in the 4th. And so, one of the things I'd like to see before the Biden administration leaves office is for us to have fixed the water transportation problem. And what I mean by that is the pipes. Let's have pipes that are lead-free, asbestos-free, wood-free, and delivering healthy water, drinking water to all parts of the 4th.
Wow, that's awesome. Well,
it's going to be heavy lift. That's heavy lift.
It will. And do you? I had one more question. I'm sorry. I thought that was going to be my last one, but my last one is: what do you tell a Republican voter out there in the 4th that may be on the fence between voting for you and voting for your opponent?
That with me, you're going to get someone who understands the facts. I may have a different spin from you on what to do about those facts, but I'm working from a set of facts that you can depend on. That you're working with someone who doesn't mind stepping away from his party leadership when he has to, as apparently I'm going to be forced to with the Manchin bill, because if they tie that in with a must-pass bill, I still have to vote no because that bill is just bad. You have a person who, at the end of the day, wants to make government work for you, and that's what you really want. You know, the issues are interesting, and you want me to vote certain ways on the issue, but doggone it, when you go to your mailbox, you want to make sure your mail's there.
Yes.
When you go and try to collect your Social Security, you don't want any mess about that. When you need a passport because you're going to Buenos Aires and you didn't know that they require your passport to be older than if your passport's going to expire in 6 months, that's not good enough. You have to have a better passport than that, and your flight leaves in a week, and you need to get that passport. That's the type of governmental services you want. You're going to be able to pick up the phone. We're not going to ask you your party affiliation. We're going to ask you what your problem is. We're going to see if we can fix it.
That's awesome. That's amazing, and that'll preach. And that will end our time together. So thank you again, Congressman.
Yes, thank you so much.
We wish you the best of luck in November. Once you win and you're getting ready to serve your next 2 years, we'll look forward to having you on again and talk to us about all the great things you're doing for the environment and for the water. And so thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Let's do this again.
All right. And thank you to our listeners. We will see you next week. Take care.
Bye-bye.